Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. It's been a while, hasn't it, since we've had a Veil Rider book, but I'm here to tell you that we have two Veil Rider books in the works in a row, as well as a complete redoing of the first book's narration due to the fact that I have in certain ways rewritten the first book, fixing continuity areas, working on myself, all that fun stuff. All that fun stuff. But, you know, it's one of those things where I always strive to put out the best product I can. And my foot, I haven't gotten, I started narrating it, that's already fucked up. But, I'm here to put out the best product I can. And the old narrations aren't great. It's just me being cringe. And I gotta go in there and fix that. Plus I can add in voice actors. So the plan is to do book 4, redo book 1, and then book 5, and then we'll do a next Emily Braun's book. But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening. I'm glad you're enjoying this tale. If you want to run a game in this same universe, there is the Veil Rider TTRPG you can find on Coffee and on Drive-Thru RPG, but let's be fair here, that site's fucking stupid, and you should just go on Coffee and get it there, honestly. And people keep asking about the RPG book being physical. Now, the book will be physical, eventually. But I want to make sure it's at the best possible stage when it goes out to print. I don't want to put out some shoddy book like Baptisms of Fire where there's spelling errors and capitalization errors and grammar errors and all kinds of weird shit like that. So I want to make sure I put out the best book I can. But I think you've been waiting far long enough. Let's get on to Chapter 1 of the working title, Strength of Spirit. Chapter 1, The Long Ice. Yule liked winter. At least he usually did on Earth, anyway. The winters here on this planet beyond the Veil were something else. It had one month in particular that tested the races as a whole. Earth, of course, had 12 months to the year, with only 24 hours in a day and 7 days to a week. The 14-month year, 8-day week, and 27-hour day still frustrated him, even after all this time living on Scapira Alara. The lonely half was still doing work on his mind, as the local simply took the errant odd hour and cut it in half, adding half an hour to the first and 13th hour of the day. To Yule it seemed like an odd and troublesome way to manage time. The planet's name was a long-winded name too, Scapira Alara. Earth was short, concise, and confined. Even Terra had its brevity despite being the fancier word for the planet. Scapira Alara, it was just a fanciful mouthful. Long days, long year, long name. Maybe it fit in the end. Winter, as it was, appeared to be a cork that shoved itself into the bottle of Scapira Alara and halted nearly everything besides trying to survive the cold. The only folk who still bundled out of their homes were the hunters and loggers, as the natives still needed pelts and wood to warm their bodies and fuel their fires. With oars being won, despite how bitter a victory it was, the Fae forces and their southern elf allies shrank back and away from the front lines. Only skeleton crews on both sides manned the forts and trenches, keeping a wary eye over the enemy's own long tendrils of chimney smoke. What Yule hated the most were the long stretches of darkness. During early winter, Yule could count the hours of daylight on both hands. With the bitter month coming, Yule could now count them on one hand, and even then he didn't need all of his fingers. With war on hold, he sent his forces home if they wanted, or put them on half duty, just to make sure everyone was counted and not frozen to death while walking to the taverns and bars. Valhalla Hill was a warm place that still bustled with activity despite the snow and ice, the same being said for Archery and Coco's forces. The human lizard brain of Yule told him to strike out during this long, dark, cold time. But when he and his human NCOs broached the idea to the native NCOs, they were adamant that it was risky and a lot of troopers would suffer in the deep cold. Not to mention, they kept alluding that it may risk the spring, and pointed out multiple times where winter wars were wrought and the following years were barren, drought-filled times where suffering was bountiful and death was the only thing reaped. Neither Yule or his human NCOs liked this answer, but they were a minority on a foreign world, and it was best to follow the protocols given. That is not to say that every long dark day Yule didn't think about striking out anyways, but there were a few things that kept him in place. Chikily, not to be outdone or forgotten, was a constant presence in Yule's home on Valhalla Hill, a home that annoyed Yule when he found it waiting for him when he left Alberdan for the winter pause. It was large and grandiose, with many of the rooms seeming to just hold furniture for meetings or entertaining, or were just places for the cleaning crew to fuss with. Yule had never had house servants, nor did house servants ever have to deal with a rambunctious harpy making a mess, and all parties involved clashed heads constantly. When Chikily wasn't rolling plates down the hallway out of boredom, Yethis was lounging around the library or constantly bothering Yule for information on Earth. The elf was on a long haul about ingesting every bit of human culture she could find, and had been gathering every scrap of paper she could about the humans and their planet. Naturally, Yethis always being around Yule made Alavara nearly glow red in the eye, and the two elven women were constantly at odds with each other. Alavara nearly brained Yethis with one of Yule's boots when the younger elf barged into their room to ask a question about the Revolutionary War, having interrupted one of the few moments Alavara and Yule could be truly alone together. Yethis made it out alive with only a bump on the head, barely spared by Yule quickly wrapping an arm around Alavara and keeping the naked elf from running after Yethis with the bayonet she scooped off of their dresser. Besides trying to keep Alavara from killing Yethis and making sure Chikily was staying out of the larder, Yule had a constant stream of information coming to him from his many special operations units. A few rogue elements had been running wild within his ranks, selling gear and weapons for profit on the black market, and a huge game of cat and mouse had erupted during the later months after Ors. Ramilla had to finally interject herself into Yule's situation when she could finally no longer bear his mind set on handshake deals, and both she and the other Dracanic Fae began helping Yule draft actual contracts for his equipment manufacturing. On the side of this, Ramilla had a merry time sniffing out the rogue elements who led her on many a chase through the countryside before coming to a grisly end at the hands of the Fae warrior. Ramilla had been proud to present information to Yule after she had sewn up all the loose holes that Yule had made, and he had to roll his eyes in contempt when he learned from the Fae that it had been the greed of the logistics and engineering wings that bred these leaks. Most of the lost shipments were tracked down in the following weeks by the extremely bored criminal investigation departments, most of whom wore trench coats as part of their uniform due to their first sergeant, Burke. Burke was a huge fan of crime and detective novels and had been waiting for her time to truly shine. This time to shine took nearly a year to finally catch the sunlight, but she took to the task with the rest of her troopers who had been struck by the gumshoe bug. Her outfit was by far the oddest, as while she wore a leather trench coat of white and gold, those under her command wore leather trench coats of black and brown. First Sergeant Burke had been so ruthless to prove herself that many in the criminal world now fear the sight of the high-collared trench coats, or the step of heavy-heeled combat boots trailing down an alleyway. For many, the sight of a shorter human woman in a white trench coat with auburn hair and gleaming amber eyes was cause for terror. Burke's fingers were in every pie, and led quite a few teams in search for information. One team in particular, under the moniker The Remnants, had gotten themselves into a bit of trouble after stumbling upon some old buried fae that had been found underground. This creature appeared to be named Malmoira and had been alive during the Fae Wars. Cringia had nearly frozen his chest when the name had hit his ears from the Brim Touch reading the report to him, and he assumed there was a link there somewhere. An even stranger report came to him one day, and Chicks had bursted into his office with an energy of a toddler finding out Santa had come early.
Werewolves and skinwalkers!
Chicks screamed, holding up a heavily crumpled report in her hand.
They exist! And humans! And necromancy! All our dreams have come true!
Yule looked up slowly from his own report, his mug of tea having paused mid-travel to his lips. He locked his eyes on Chicks and blinked. Only you could be excited for necromancy and werewolves.
You don't understand!
Chicks said with panting breath, running over to Yule's desk and spreading out the abused papers.
Look! Humans are the reason why hornwalkers exist, and there's a queen!
Yule took a slow sip from his mug, internally sighing, then set it down with a soft thud. A queen?
Yes, her name is Castle, and she's some British lady from World War II. She's been trying to keep the other hornwalkers in line and teach them to control themselves.
Chick said, nearly beside herself as she started rustling along the papers. Yule glanced down at the report. So, a British woman caught, what, a curse?
No, she got infected on Earth.
Chick said busily, waving a hand in the air.
Something, old fate weapon, something, infection, same old song and dance.
Lovely. Yule said flatly, picking his mug back up and moving his own report to the side. He doubted he would be getting back to it anytime soon. Another voice echoed down the hallway, a voice Yule knew well enough by now.
Hey, Yule! We have fucking werewolves!
Austin started, who despite the weather wore a larger floral print shirt over his first jacket.
Oh, Chicks is already here.
Morning, Austin, Yule said, gesturing with his mug towards the man in a vague hello. Did you know we have werewolves? Austin chuckled.
Yeah, I heard something about it.
Austin was a veteran, much like the other human veil riders and lone wanderers, and had spent time in the army. He was a hard-faced man that carried an easy smile and bore quite a few scars from his time in the military, one in particular being an old cut between his eyebrows. He had given up dealing with his long hair and shaved it down to the skin, keeping it smooth while sporting a short, rangy beard all the way up to his temples. He was, in short, human as could be.
So, here's the crazy shit about the werewolves.
Chicks continued on, finally finding the paper she was looking for.
They never existed until we came along. One of us sang a fucking song and we accidentally infected the locals with a curse.
Austin chuckled.
Yeah, something tells me that's gonna make us a few enemies in the future.
I can't wait to get war declared on us because someone decided to sing Boot Scoot Boogie and accidentally created a sub-race. Yule murmured dryly, picking up the report on Castle and giving it a brief look over. Chicks pulled out another piece of paper in her report.
Wild thing is that they work in reverse of what we thought. They actually gain more control of themselves on a full moon, while the new moon commands that they hunt and run around like a bunch of little murderous hooligans. They're currently hiding in plain sight amongst the citizenry and are trying to just deal with their curse.
Admirable of them, Yule said, then looked to Austin. Remind me to talk with Wolf and see if we can get some funding to help these fellas deal with their curse. If we're responsible, we need to take care of it. Chicks held up a finger.
Then there's the necromancy thing.
Starla,
Macrat said, having been walking by in the hallway with a basket of her laundry.
Oh, right, Starla, which is necromancy in everything but name.
Chick said, pulling out the sheet of paper. Before she could start, Yule turned to Austin. How is Gremlin?
Pregnant as fuck.
Austin said with a chuffing laugh, pulling over a spare chair and sitting down.
One of her lads had sent her some footwear to help with the swelling, but it's done nothing for her temper. Also, Coco got someone pregnant.
Chicks went to jump in excitedly about her report, but faltered when Yule almost choked on a mouthful of tea, only barely managing to keep it down. What?
Yeah, remember that elf woman from Emil Norris? Imra, or whatever the hell her name was? She made a deal with Coco in order to get those birds to us faster. It appears she got what she wanted.
Austin said with intoned meaning, leaning forward and plucking a small hard candy from a bowl on Yule's desk. Macrat came walking back down the hallway, holding a finger in the air.
can't be too surprised now. Imra's always been one to seek power and hold it.
Yule groaned in his throat, nearly in a growl, and rubbed a hand across his forehead. She's been trying to cement herself as a paramour of a fucking human warlord, and she's finally got what she wanted. Now she's tied to the hip to Coco.
Tied at the crotch, more likely.
Austin said as he popped the candy into his mouth, then did nothing but smile cheekily when Yule glared at him.
You better steel yourself, because a lot of the men have been courting Oni and Brim-Touched. Not to mention that freak Grouch and his obsession with the scent.
Yule held up his hand, his voice perhaps a tad louder than it should have been. Yes, thank you, that will be enough.
Oh, get over it. All of you are being taken in by the locals because they all want half-human babies.
Chick said shortly, pulling out another sheet of paper she had been fishing for while Austin and Yule talked, having 7 lined up on the desk.
Some kind of magic caster called an Anderbash has the ability of casting Starla magic. This, in turn, allows them to interrupt the cycle of life and death.
Yule shrugged with his mouth. So, necromancy?
That's what I said in the first fucking place!
Chick snapped.
But no, it's different, apparently.
Yule grabbed his mug while Austin cleared his throat, trying not to laugh. Chicks continued on.
Anyway, the people who pioneered this kind of magic were Telfurian Fae, and there are a few still living in the continent.
Are they causing a fuss? Yule asked, then took a sip from his mug. Chicks pushed a paper towards him.
Not so much causing a fuss as having a large collection of humans at their disposal. Our souls have nowhere to go, and a few of these Anderbash have been collecting them. That, or seeking out the long-lived humans and offering them a place to live. From what I understand, this one has nearly 30 humans from various points in time. And these ones lucked out and got long lives.
Ryla Jade. Yule murmured, picking up the paper and reading the name. And what do you mean, lucked out? Austin spoke up this time, beating Chicks and making her quietly fume.
Records show that humans who fall through the veil run the gambit when it comes to time. Some live extremely short lives, aging rapidly, while others live a completely normal life with no changes. A far smaller number live for an extremely long time, the longest being 312 years. Appeared to be some kind of knight that wore a helmet with a hound skull visor. Died under the service of some god or another.
One of our teams followed what they believed to be a human wearing a baggy hood way up north past the edges of Baihu and east of the long grass, and were able to get close enough to a small town high upon the edge of the mountains. They were pushed back hard when they got sick from some kind of spell. They're fine now.
Chick said, reaching over the paper in Yule's hand and tapping on a passage in particular. Yule flapped the paper, smacking away Chick's hand with a muffled sound of annoyance, then flicked the paper and started reading again as he spoke. This is from White Knight and Black Rook?
Yep.
Chicks replied. Yule continued to read. What about Black Bishop and Black Knight?
Black Knight was found and killed, as was his team. I'm afraid they got caught by orcs before they could fully complete their mission. Black Bishop is still on track and in Northern Trace.
Chick said. Yule grimaced. Poor bastards. Black Bishop is still tracking the human, isn't he? The one with the gun.
Yes, however, we have recently learned he managed to kill the human as well as severely hinder his personal army.
Chick said, then tapped the back of the paper in Yule's hands again.
I think this is a key to success come spring, getting in touch with this human-loving fae.
Austin turned his head towards Chicks, still rolling the candy in his mouth along his tongue.
You mean your little plan to head out after the long month of darkness and try to beat the Fae to controlling the north?
Yes, that plan.
Chick said icily, fixing Austin with a withering glare.
There's an isolated race that lives in the ice wastes. And if we can secure the north along with this fae, it will further our power gains.
Yule set the paper down, scritching at his chin. I will speak with Gremlin about it and see what she thinks. Recruitment numbers are still going steady, and we have absolute trust from the Council in Emilnoris. Not to mention Prince Nim is proving to be a stalwart bulwark in the west.
There is also the region of Troika to the east.
Austin said, reaching forward and taking another candy.
Lots of folk don't like the Fae there, and some have been crossing in boats to join up with the auxiliaries because they don't know of your little training base over there. The giant spiders kind of freaked some of the lone wanderers out, though.
Yule looked up slowly from the report and fixed his eyes on Austin. Giant spiders?
Big ones. Half humanoid.
Austin said, pulling out a piece of paper from his pocket.
Here's a sketch of one from one of the recruiters.
Yule took the picture, opened it, took one look at it, then promptly passed out, dropping his mug of tea while Chicks and Austin cried out in alarm and laughter.
A fear of spiders.
Alavara murmured with a shake of her head, dabbing the end of a rag around the edge of a cut on Yule's forehead.
You will charge headlong into artillery fire and gleefully wade into the middle of a melee. But a spider makes you lose consciousness?
Yule glared up at her from where he sat on their bed, the beginning of a black eye starting to darken around the left side of his face. It's different. They have those little beady eyes, fangs, and those horrible little clicking legs and mandibles. As he had fallen to the ground, Yule had bounced his face off of his desk, bruising his orbital socket as well as giving him a nice cut above the eye.
Yes, well...
Alavara said, thinking back to how she would play with Orbweaver spiders as a child.
The Haviter have neither mandibles or little beady eyes.
Yule scoffed. Are you kidding me? That drawing had more than one pair of eyes.
They were not beady.
Alavara said, eliciting a hiss from Yule as she gave his cut a sharp poke.
And they are very nice people. Very kind as well. They know that they scare a lot of other races and tend to stick to their own communities.
Yule grumbled as he reached up and poked at his bruised eye. If they're on a map, that means they're gonna have finders drop napalm there.
Not funny.
Alavara chided, though she did smirk as she tossed a bloody rag into their dirty clothes bin.
You can't burn an entire race just because you don't like them.
Yule kept poking his eye angrily. Clearly you haven't read up on all of your human history.
Oh, I've read up on all the human history I need to.
Alavara said dourly, putting her hands on her hips and looking out the window towards the busily buzzing base. Alavara was focusing mostly on current human history, such as the record amount of pregnancies between humans and their Scapiran partners. Meanwhile, despite liberal application of the correct parts, Alavara was beginning to wonder if she was doing something wrong. There was a knock at the door, a knock that both Alavara and Yule knew well, and Chikily quickly bustled in, shaking snow from his hair.
Chikily, you're supposed to dust off first.
Alavara said with an annoyed smile, helping the harpy remove the frost and ice from his hair and feathers. Chikily breathed out with a tired sigh, flicking his wing claws.
Chikily, no. Just wanting inside the worm as fast as possible. Gliding much slower than flying.
What do you have for me, little man? Yule said cheerfully, walking over and wrapping the harpy in a side hug as Chikily handed a couple of letters to him.
Message from Coco and some other letters Chikily not recognize.
Chikily said while multiple pairs of boots echoed down the hallway towards the room. Mackey and Yethis peered around the door frame, both of their faces sour.
Explains the puddles.
Mackey said, a pair of wet socks in one of her hands.
For a moment, I thought some kind of snow creature had snuck its way inside to assassinate Yule.
Yethis snorted.
You're lucky. He came in through my window.
Can you two get him warmed up? He has a fierce chill.
Alavara said, stirring the still dripping Chikily away from Yule and out of their bedroom. Mackey nodded, giving a half-hearted salute to Alavara.
Aye, boss. We'll get the little sky rat some new clothes as well.
Come on, Chikily. We have some broth downstairs just for this sort of thing.
Yethis said, reaching over and rustling the harpy's hair. Alavara saw Yethis look up, trying to catch Yule's eye, and she narrowed her own despite Yule being too busy looking at the letters. As the trio walked back down the hallway, Alavara fitfully gnarled her flaring emotions inside her chest. A lot of the other humans, such as the Veil Rider NCOs and Lone Wanderers, were taking multiple partners, even going as far as giving them a nickname that came before the word wife. With Yule only having her, a lot of the enlisted were constantly filling her head with their own desires, and it got to the point Alavara had to wrap her mental tendrils around herself to keep from hearing the loud thoughts that echoed out to her. She unwound one of her mental tendrils, invisible to everyone but her, and sighed at it. They always reminded her of thick sewing thread or perhaps even a ghostly vine, and had been with her since she was born. They were becoming bothersome, as all they did was bring her news that dozens of women were lining up to be Yule's second wife, and none were as forward as Yethis. "Did you hear Coco got Imra pregnant?" Yule said absentmindedly, already halfway through reading Coco's letter. Alavara felt that same burning anger return to her stomach, and she folded her arms.
Is that right?
And he also got a new messenger, some little sky rat named Kip Kip. Yule said with a low laugh, folding the letter with his fingers. They're buried deep in snow, and it's really shutting down their base as far as activity goes. Alavara reached out with a tendril to caress Yule's mind, and only found him thinking over something Chicks and Austin had told him. Crinja was still there too, but not nearly as present as she had been, and Alavara went unnoticed. She turned, picking up a towel and throwing it down the ground to mop up the puddle where Chikily was standing.
And how is yours doing? Everyone seems to be winding down despite your fellow humans being keen on something else.
I'd kill to know how you get your information. Yule said with a smile, then opened up the other letter. Well, we've been quite understanding in the fact we can't make war during winter. So we're setting our sights on what you folk call the melt and the flow months. Alavara nodded, moving the towel side to side with her foot.
The snow can last well into the awakening, you know. Can your vehicles even move through that?
Not deep snow, no. Yule murmured, narrowing his eyes down at the letter in his hand before sighing and tossing it aside on the bed. Alavara, what do you know of the Serans? Alavara blinked for a moment, the word having not hit her ears for a very long time, and she turned to look towards Yule.
Serbians? The little-eared people in the ice wastes?
Yes, Yule said, opening the other letter. Those. Alavara shrugged.
Not much, really. They're around the same height as an Agardaling. You had a whole bunch of those come down to join the auxiliaries.
Short little snow elves cost us a fortune in eyewear, Yule grumbled, now reading through the other letter.
You shouldn't have offered.
Alavara giggled, kicking the towel towards her clothes bin.
Anyway, around that height and not much different from an elf except that their ears are leam-like, coming wide off the head. I've only seen them in drawings, but they mostly trade with the Agardalings and Staglings, rarely ever coming south.
Yule sighed as he read, already not liking the contents. Why don't they come south at all?
They don't feel a need to.
Alavara replied, sitting down next to Yule and toeing off her shoes.
They make their lives in the north.
Yule reached over and tapped the previous letter. If a small contingent was coming down in order to speak to me, would that be a big deal or a small deal?
Very big deal,
Alavara said with a nod.
It will likely be major news along the kingdoms in the north, and nobility will try to jockey in to tag along.
I was afraid of that, Yule said, folding up the letter in his hand. They want to meet me halfway when the thaw begins. They want to enter negotiations for our mineral contracting and trade, something called Mincowder and Tarkwhite, both of which they appear to have come into during their little industries. Alavara pursed her lips in a short thought, then shrugged again.
Doesn't ring any bells to me. Would be pretty fascinating to finally meet one of them, though. I can go, right?
You would go even if I told you no, Yule said, then hummed in his throat, remembering Alavara sneaking into the convoy heading to Tallwheat. Actually, I would bet money you would sneak your way in just for the fun of making me angry. Alavara grinned and laughed.
You know me so well. Though, what else is up north? I can see a few of the words on the letter when you read it, you know.
Some fae I need to see about, Yule murmured, reaching an arm around Alavara and pressing his fingertips into the flesh of her hip. At the same time, the orcs have made major headway with help of the southern elf forces, both being bankrolled by the fae. A few councils up that way are calling for aid, all of which are around both that fae I was talking about and those Serbians. Alavara hummed in her throat as she leaned against Yule's side, laying her fingers one by one across his thigh.
Are you saying you're already planning out your next big adventure?
Big adventure, my ass. Yule said with a low laugh. We'll be using horses the entire way. None of the roads can sustain the weight of vehicles with so much melt. We turn into a fucking quagmire. Alavara started slowly running her fingers along the thigh of Yule's uniform pants.
Only taking a company?
If I can get away with it, Yule sighed. I have to rely on harpies and aircraft bringing us supplies in a pinch. The click of Alavara's top button shirt coming undone made Yule tilt his head towards her, and he quickly took in that Alavara had been undoing her buttons the entire time he had been talking, exposing the pale, tender flesh of her breasts. Yule raised an eyebrow, at which Alavara just grinned and he shook his head. If you wanted me to stop talking about work, you could have just asked.
This way is more fun.
Alavara said teasingly, then giggled when Yule turned, jerking open her shirt the rest of the way and making one of her large breasts jiggle out into view. There was very little talk of work for the next 20 minutes, the only talking being done by the feet of their bed frame scooting back and forth across the floorboards. After this break, Yule and Alavara lay panting on top of their blankets, though Yule was still squinting through a far more painful bruised eye. Despite Alavara being short of breath, she let out a snicker.
Sorry about, kicking you in the face.
If you're going to call for a change of position mid-scene, you could at least make sure you clear my head before bringing that leg around. Yule grumbled, now hurting from his eye, his nose, as well as multiple bite marks along his neck.
Sorry.
Alavara chortled, beads of sweat trickling down her wobbling breast with her laughs.
I'll be careful next time.
Keep kicking me in the face and there won't be a next time, Yule said, then laughed as Alavara let out a snort and covered her face as she laughed. He lay there and watched her giggle and chuckle to herself, smiling as he did, then reached over and gave her stomach a soft pat. I'm glad you're not getting too stressed out. Alavara pulled her hand away, still grinning at him.
Stressed out about what?
Come on, Yule said, running his fingers up and down her flesh. I know, you know, a lot of the humans are basically creating little harems. Alavara's grin drew down to a strange smile.
Well, yes.
You don't have to worry about it, Yule said, giving her another pat, though this made a hollow thunk sound due to her belly button, making Alavara laugh again. I'm not that kind of guy. Alavara let out a sigh after controlling her giggles again, staring up at the ceiling. She was quiet for a long minute, then turned to Yule.
They'll expect it, you know.
Who? Yule asked, still idly dragging his fingertips up and down her flesh.
Other leaders. They'll see you as a warlord, and warlords have always had multiple wives. Except for that orc woman who just has, multiple husbands.
Alavara said, though the idea was a curious thought. Yule snorted. You mean that Hoova Tuva woman keeps her entire capital city immobile to avoid getting assassinated?
Yeah.
Alavara replied. Seems like a lot of work, Yule murmured, running his index finger around her belly button. Alavara furrowed her brows and looked over to Yule.
Well, yeah, you have to keep the entire city mobile on carts and such. Their wagon trains run for miles.
I was talking about the multiple wives, Yule said, only smirking when Alavara gave him a hard flick to the side of his skull.
Smartass.
Alavara said in English, but scooted closer to him so she could turn and drip a leg over his own, snuggling into his side.
Are you sure?
Yule shrugged. I mean, I think so. Not unless something weird happens.
Nah, Yule. With the amount of snow this place is getting, we'd be bogged down after the first mile, let alone anything further. The melt we're gonna get is bad enough. but the snow gets even worse the further north we go.
Classic said, leaning away from the motorcycle engine he was working on inside the mechanical bay. Yule rubbed lightly at his bruised eye. I was afraid you were going to say that. We're going to have to move out an entire company on horseback and wide wheel wagons.
How horrible.
Classic said sarcastically, tossing a wrench onto his workbench.
You'll have to ride in a saddle on a royal warhorse like some kind of peasant.
Yule rolled his eyes, looking over to the locally produced Huey that had his engine bay open for repairs. Do you think you can get us ammo and water with those birds if we need it?
Depends on how far away you are, but I don't see that being an issue.
Classic replied, picking up a socket wrench.
If needs must, we can run harpies. Regardless, I'll be sending lighter vehicles like the dingoes. But anything heavier is going to sink right down into the bog until the roads start to firm up.
Yule looked over at the human, shaking his head. Why won't you just take the star already?
Over my dead fucking body.
Classic said, then clicked his tongue to his grassoline, the rangy little feline growling as it came in through his door flap. Leams were felinid creatures resembling the felines of Earth, but were far more evolved to suit their environment. Grassolimes were from areas with naturally tall grass biomes, and had even evolved to fire quills from their bodies, making them look much like a spiky porcupine from Earth mixed with a bobcat. These long quills were also natural camouflage, allowing them to blend in better with the tall grass. Classic was firmly embedded in the Lone Wanderer camp and did most of his work with the vehicles, teaching the new recruits how to maintain nearly every vehicle in the fleet. Even now, despite being in a land of fantasy, he wore his old beat-up black boots, oil-stained overalls, khaki winter jacket, and a maroon Jeep cap pulled over a field cap to keep his ears warm. He had broken his glasses several times, but instead of getting new ones, just repaired them with tape, the ends of which were constantly getting stuck in his ruddy Van Dyke beard. Yule reached down to lightly wiggle a finger into the fur on top of the grassolime's head, avoiding the long spines and prickles that adorned the rest of its body. So, just light vehicles?
Motorbikes and dingoes. Maybe a puma if you're lucky.
Classic said loudly as he gave the engine of the motor a rap with the wrench, working his way around to the other spark plug.
Try to avoid getting into a firefight with armor if you can manage it.
Yule chuckled, then winced painfully as the grassoline wound through his legs and poked him with a quill. Ow, watch it, Maybell.
Don't yell at my cat!
Classic said loudly with warning, wiggling his socket wrench angrily in the air. It's not even a cat! Yule barked back at him, and shooed away the creature before it stuck him again. I assume you'll be staying here? Classic gave a short, derisive snort.
Well, yeah, the fucking bars are here, ain't they?
Creature of habit, are you? Yule said, then ducked slowly to the left as the socket went sailing over his right shoulder. Yule left Classic to his work and went back out onto the cold base to trudge his way back to Alavara. A month passed by with little much else to do. Small celebrations were held here and there in accordance with little holidays from all the different cultures bound on the base, as well as the humans teaching a few of their own to the locals. The human holiday of Yule became quite popular, much to the annoyance of Yule himself, and quickly caught on around both the base and the Broken Kingdoms. Astronomers were quick to point out the shortest day of the year was already quickly approaching, and an ad hoc celebration was set up with speed. There was some confusion about the Yule log, in which a local lumberman hewed a large log into the semblance of Yule himself. They then made Yule pick a random person to set the log alight. Yule, of course, chose Chikily, who took an odd amount of glee in setting the log on fire. Afterwards, as the log burned, gifts were shared in the custom told by the human lone wanderers, and a feasting meal was brought out, paid for by Yule and the Vale Rider treasury. Glog was made by the gallon by the lone wanderers, as well as the best approximation of buttered rum and spiced cider, and they were instant classics to the locals of New Sanrion. The collective hangover the day after Yule's Day was legendary, and was quickly written into the new catalog of local history. Yule had 2 days of no messages, as they were being kept by command in order to give him a few proper days off. But on the third day he awoke to a large stack of letters and missives by his breakfast. He read the lot of them, sighed, then took off into the city of New Sanrion for a quick visit to Al Alori Respin. The old governor was easy to find, as he was usually as deep as Yule was in paperwork, and he walked into the older Valley Elf's office with the swing of the already open door. The older elf had gotten most of his weight back, though his eyes bore the mental scars of someone who had seen too much. Respin looked up with raised brows, then beamed a smile up at the human. "Yule, good morning. Are you sleeping better with the droughts? Less nightmares?" "I've been needing them less and less," Yule murmured, pulling out a chair and sitting down in it. He had told Respin of his reoccurring nightmares, those of his daughter and what could have been happening to her on the other side of the veil, and he had a local alchemist make him something called Fog's Essence, a slurry that when mixed with water helped him sleep with little to no dreaming. Respin smiled kindly. "Well, I'm sure that while Cyril would love to take credit, I'm sure it's more that lovely spouse of yours that's doing most of the heavy lifting." "What do you mean?" Yule asked him, leaning back in the chair with a tired sigh. "I'm sure someone has told you once already," Respin said with a chuckle, quickly scribbling something on a sheaf of paper and then rolling it up so he could stamp it. "She is blood-touched, and women like her always have the ability to soothe the mind." Yule hummed in his throat, closing his eyes as he heard Respin scribbling again. "Your alleged mind readers and thought thieves?" "The very same," Respin chirped, stamping a few papers in quick succession. "I'm pretty sure that if she was a mind reader, she would have been running far and away with me with a quickness," Yule murmured, pulling his patrol cap down over his eyes. "That and I would know if someone was taking thoughts from my head." Respin snorted. "Of course you would. Anywho, I figured you'd like to know we sorted out that whole common cold problem we had cropping up." "Figured out a cure, did you?" Yule asked him, remembering back to the instances of some children getting sick from an illness they had never encountered before, brought over, of course, by the humans at any rate. "Not so much as cure, merely a round of reliefs that can ease the coughing, syrups and drops and the like," Respin said, setting a different kind of stamp in front of him and placing a small pot of wax to melt. "We are not a stranger to some of the things you humans have dragged in through the years, and this is a far cry from that pox one of you brought through some years ago. Thankfully, magic casters and alchemists could stifle the things before they blew up too badly." Yule chuffed. "Not much scares you people when you have magic to lean on." "I wouldn't say that. Some of the more unpleasant diseases have been making their mark around the Fey bases," Respin said with a grimace, giving his head a shake. "Makes me extremely happy that you and your men and women keep themselves clean. The human disease has been causing quite an issue in the underground around the Fey bases, as far as my spies report." "The human disease?" Yule asked, tilting his cap up slightly to look at Respin. "Don't tell me herpes made it across." Respin shook his head. "Not quite. From what I understand, it is called syphilis." "Fucking hell," Yule groaned, now leaning forward in his chair. "How the hell did syphilis get across the veil?" Respin shrugged, pouring wax onto a large letter. "Someone wasn't keeping themselves clean while mingling with the locals. Nasty stuff it is. Heads straight to the brain of elf and brimtush alike, turns them into right-out walking dead if they aren't treated within a few days." "It turns people into syphilitic zombies?" Yule said in disgust, wrinkling his face. "Are you telling me that this disease turns the locals into walking, moaning zombies if they aren't treated quick enough?" Respin nodded. "Fast as my spies have seen is a man going from healthy to shambling around in only a few days. Spreads like wildfire through the locals. Fey forces have had to round up a couple hundred people to either inoculate them or dispose of them." "What lovely news," Yule said dourly. "Do you have any good news for me?" Respin nodded, placing a stamp down onto the wax to seal the letter. "Thanks to you, New Sanrion is a hot commodity. We are training plumbers and engineers in a near constant cycle. People are happy. Villages and towns around us are upgrading their buildings to be like us. And even the more distant kingdoms crane their necks to get a look at Valhalla Hill or archery. I've noticed we're getting more and more volunteers for service. How is your end going down here in the civilian sector? Yule asked, looking out the window to the still bustling town. Oh, it's quite good, Respin said, smiling at Yule. Treasury is near bursting, and we're having to constantly spend money on new schools and bathhouses, you name it. We were even able to set up a mercenary hall. Yule quirked a brow. Mercenary hall? Oh yes. If we need some work done and don't want to bother you, we can just hire adventurers to take on the task. They are quite keen, Respin said, tossing another letter in front of him. Just last week we sent up a small group of them to patrol along the forest paths off the roads, cheaper than risking our actual guards and soldiers. They're taking care of a few raiding issues. Yule raised his other brow. Raiding issues? Oh, you know how it is. Fisk is just around the corner. Orcs are doing their usual thing. Bandits and highwaymen are keen for an easy snatch and grab and are setting up their camps. Usually we would send out guards or soldiers to mount along the roadways, but those who don't make it past the recruitment process are more than happy to volunteer under the service of new Sanrion's guilds. Respin said nonchalantly, They are outfitted and sent out. You take care of our roads, we take care of the rest. Yule gave a short laugh, holding up a hand. Respin, your city's attached to a military base. You could just ask for aid. Oh, yes, we very well could, Respin replied, riding with one of the new fountain pens made locally in town. But everyone knows you'll be off to war again here soon. Ors was a very bitter battle for all sides involved, and you'll likely be taking the war to a new front. Knowing how these things go, can't be relying on you the entire time. We have to pull our weight. Yule pursed his lips at Respin, then started drumming his fingers along the edge of his desk. I never asked you to pull your own weight. Our contract states that I take care of military needs of the town and along the roads. I know, Respin said with a small smile, leaning back in his chair and setting his pen in a hand-carved wooden holder. But I do not forget a debt. And you have done enough for me and my people. You have a war to win, and all I have to do is keep my city safe. That means I have no bother in outfitting some adventurers and sending them out to fight bandits and other riffraff. Yule reset his cap, then stood. I see. Well, be sure to take out the hiring fees from what we already pay you. No need, Respin said with a gloating smile as he held out the sheet of paper to Yule. We don't need to, and we paid up the season's dues. Actually, we paid up for a few other towns along the way. Montress was on the fence about joining in with your little contractual military operation, so I'm giving him a taste of it out of my own pocket. Yule looked down the paper, then blinked at the large number at the bottom of the page. I'm not the best at percentages, but you're making that much money. Life is good in the company of the humans, and to the company of humans I pay my dues, Respin said with a wink, then rang a bell for one of the servants to bring him tea. And that is the end of the first chapter of the fourth Narrator book, working title Strength of Spirit. If you like this story and stories like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. If you really like the stories in the channel, stop by the coffee, give $1, because I'm going to tell you right now, it takes 6 months to get a payout from YouTube. That's how long it takes, because the threshold for the payout. YouTube does not fund the channel. You guys fund the channel, and I fund the channel via my own personal means. So if you want to help support the channel, support the VAs, you can, donate $1 or $2, buy stickers, buy patches, buy books, buy the RPG game, buy the lore blurbs. There's all kinds of fun ways to support the channel. Also, another fun way to support the channel is via the memberships, because members get teasers and they get access to a member-only channel where they get to see all the art as it's made and the final result before anyone else gets to. The first shirts are the highest tier, and these guys really do hold up the channel on their shoulders, and they allow me to do a lot of things I wouldn't be able to do without their help. That'd be Insane Medic, Death Dancer, Codijero, and E-Machino. These 4 guys have been just completely crushing it. Like, if it weren't for them, I'd be well and truly fucked. To be fair with you, they really do help out. And any first shirt helps out the most of anyone. Next up is the E4 Mafia, my sweet little sham shields just like me. That'd be Snitty Enjoyer? Oh no, not Snitty Enjoyer. Darkside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacuna 8, Josh Beatty, Jake Spear, Matty Boy, Noah Freeman, Flash of Green, and Crusader 0625. You guys, Snitty Enjoyer. God bless the E4 Mafia. Fuck me. And a big shout out to all the boys in Stuffy Squad. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil. That was Rue, that was Hailey, that was Mech, and that was Fire. Stay safe out there.